Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining on this third week of the course on communication on labor migration and mobility. In this week, we're going to start diving into the concrete skills that you will need to build your communication strategy and to make sure that your message gets across. Once again, we're in very good hands today with Charlotte Mann taking the lead on the session. As usual, the session is being recorded and it will be posted on the eCampus afterwards. Let me just take this opportunity to thank you for your patience. We know that the video last week was slightly delayed, so thank you for your patience on that. We'll try to make sure to upload this one right away after the end of the session so that you will be able to refer back to it should you need to. So we have two sessions this week, one today, one on Thursday, as usual, at the same time, 10 a.m. Central European Summer Time, where similarly to what we did last week, we're going to hear from a practitioner sharing their own experience, the challenges that they've met, and how they've addressed them. I will now leave the floor to Charles to take the session forward. Feel free to come in with your questions, your comments, either in the chat or by using the raise hand functions at the bottom of your screen. I'm sure by now you are absolute experts, total experts on the use of Zoom. So we'll be here in the background if you need our support. Charles, thank you for joining today again, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. It's my pleasure to be with you again today. Just before we start off with today's conversation, I wanted maybe to check in on you and hear from what you took from last week's session. Especially Thursday, we had quite a long and passionate conversation with Ana Santos. We didn't necessarily have so much time for interactions with her afterwards. So I just wanted to hear from you if anyone wants to take the floor. What are your main takeaways from last week? What would you like to still cover? So yeah, if there's anything that stuck with you after last week's conversation, I'd be happy to start off with that. Don't be shy. Does anyone have anything to share from last week's both my presentation and the conversation with Anna that you enjoyed or found interesting or are curious to know more about? Okay, I hope it's all clear.
Seems like we have a shy group this morning, a little bit on the shy side.
So nothing special. I mean,
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, so for me, the biggest takeaway from last week was how to humanize the labor migration story. You know, how to put the human face on it. And once you start putting the human face on it, I think sort of the statistics approach just falls away because you begin to see how like it impacts on real people. So for me, that was the biggest takeaway. And what I took away also was how, you know, despite the stories coming from as far away as Philippines, how they resonate with you know, things that are happening in my own country. Like the experiences are so similar, and you can almost draw parallels. and it just began making me think, like, in a real sort of personal way. Like, I began thinking of like some of my own relatives that have just left the country. Like, I have an aunt who left like 20 years ago to go to Ireland, and she's never come back. And I wonder what the experiences are. So I began thinking about that a lot, and I also began thinking about stories of other sort of people that have left for that have migrated, like, to South Africa, and the challenges that they face, and how, if I was going to write a story, how I would want to sort of interview those people to bring the story to life. But at the same time, I became cognizant of the challenges of how to locate those stories and how to locate those characters, so that I can bring sort of the labor migration story from my region to reality through writing about them. Thank you, Charles.
Thanks a lot. And I mean, yeah, resonates with a lot of things we discussed last week. I think one of the main elements in what you're saying is, we have become accustomed, for a number of reasons, to see migrants as a group within society that is somewhat different from the rest of society. And I think, especially listening to Anna, and I'm pleased to see that what she talked about resonate with things that you have experienced, even though you are very far away from the reality that she was describing. Migration is also about, lived experiences that are very similar to a lot of, especially working people, in the context of labor migration. If you remember the frames that we discussed on Tuesday, there was this idea of us versus them. A lot of the way we communicate or we report on migration is by creating this idea that migrants are a homogenic group. Even, they all have the same political belief, or they are all supporting the same football club. I mean, it's a group. It's much more complex than that. And we often have much more in common with some migrants who maybe have the same social status or the same type of work than we do, than we have with some fellow countrymen or countrywomen that are not migrating at all, but that are located in other spheres of our society, maybe because they live in a rural setting, or maybe because they are placed somewhere else on the social ladder. And so, I mean, I hope this pushes you to revisit a little bit the way we look at this topic, and the way we can look for a communication that is more inclusive and more human. Michael, I see you have your hand raised. Oh, I see Michael has lost the connection, maybe. Okay. Did anyone else want to share anything that resonates, or any type of frustration from what we heard last week? What you found interesting, what you learned, what was new, maybe as well? Okay, I don't see anything special. Anyways, don't hesitate to raise your hand, or to put some comments in the chat as we go about it today, because yeah, it's always interesting to hear from you, and just to make sure that the arguments that we're putting forward, the analysis that we're making, resonates with the experience that you have on the ground. And if you want to pause me at some point in time and look, more in detail on some things, that's something that we can do. A little word about this week. So as Miki was saying, we're going to have 2 sessions. We have today and another session Thursday. On Thursday, we're going to be listening to someone with quite a lot of experience documenting some, I would say, aspects of migration that are quite similar to what Anna has been doing as well, but with a stronger focus on issues related to exploitation. Oh, Michael, I see you're back and your hand is raised. Maybe if you wanted to comment, we bring you in and then we move forward. Go ahead.
Okay, good morning. Well, thank you. Sorry, I'm having problem with my network. I'm having problem with my network here.
We can hear you, Michael.
Yeah, so can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm having I'm having a little problem. So just from last week, my experience, because one of the challenge we've faced here reporting migration is labor migration, is that even though Nigeria is a highly sending country, as regards working on stories around fair recruitment, the challenge is that, as we used to say, one of the best kept secrets in Nigeria is for someone who wants to migrate. He doesn't even really want to share his travel experience with anyone. They like to keep it very private, probably until something wrong happens along the route, migration route, before he's able to speak up. So most times for us as journalists, it's always difficult tracking potential labor migrants to share their recruitment experience. I had a personal experience of a story that I was tracking with someone who was supposed to go to Kuwait. He had his agent, the travel agent, and so another challenge we've also faced here is travel agencies doubling as recruitment agencies. They are not licensed to act as recruitment agencies. They are just travel agencies who are supposed to make visas arrangement for people who want to travel, but now they are doubling as recruitment agents. So this guy that I met didn't really, even though the agent had taken almost 2 million naira in the local currency, which is about currently with the exchange rate, which is over $2,000 from him. He really didn't even want to disclose the name of that agent and was not willing. So most times it's difficult tracking story. That's why if you notice, most of the report coming out from Nigeria is usually about returnees. And because most of the times when the IOM helps with returnees and all of that, it's easy for journalists to track returnees, but it's always difficult tracking migrants that are moving. So that's a challenge. But from the experience that Anna shared, I learned a lot, and I've been able to put my thoughts together, and I really feel this renewed energy on really how to relate with different aspects of the reporting. Yeah, different aspects of the reporting. I like the different aspects that she was able to focus her stories on. Both not just those that are living, but also those who are already having experience in their countries of destination and all of that. So for us, initially, the problem is usually about tracking some of those migrant workers, but the experience from Anna was really revealing. So I really experienced that section.
Thanks a lot, Michael. I mean, it's true that, maybe one thing that Anna has sometimes, which is a bit of a luxury, is she has quite some time to carry out her work. And this is maybe what helps her to some extent find the appropriate character to be able, exactly as you were saying, sometimes it's difficult to build the trust and to make sure that, you're able to document, for example, the experience prior to departure, or, what is the lived experience abroad, etc. That comes through the fact that, a lot of her work is done through, support from organizations like the Pulitzer Center or things like this. So obviously, you know, the more you're able to kind of raise your profile and become a journalist that is specialized on this topic, or a communicator that is specialized on this topic, the more you're able to land stories that are powerful. Yeah, we're going to go through some ideas today that can help you maybe find some good stories. I see that Omar, who is in Ethiopia, if I recall correctly, has shared. Oh, Michael, you want to react, or just open the mic if you do.
Okay,
No,
okay.
no, it's
I
okay.
was just trying to bring my hands down.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay, you're trying to bring the hand back. Okay.
Yeah.
Omar, did you want to share your comment with the rest of the group?
Sure. Yeah. So I remember. Thank you, Charles. Yeah, I remember last week we had a guest as well, and it was interesting to hear the story on how the financial system in some countries also is so abusive of the migrant workers. We also hear stories, similar stories in our country. Migrant workers in the Gulf countries who are perceived to be illegal there, and who can't open bank accounts or something like that, so they don't have any place to put their savings. So yeah, they are abused. Usually they just keep their entire salary. The employers keep their entire salaries. It's like they are saving their salaries for them for later, but you know, when they come back, you know, they don't get anything at all, so they come back, you know, empty-handed. So it's really interesting to hear that story as well. It's even the financial system can also be abusive, not only the employers. Yeah, thank you. Back to you.
No, I agree with that. And I mean, it's sometimes very frustrating because we live in a world where, you know, you know, if you look at communication, for example, 10 years ago for an Ethiopian, let's say, migrant worker in Saudi Arabia to communicate with Ethiopia, it might have been very difficult. There was not so much cell phone, Wi-Fi, apps. And I mean, over the past 10, 15 years, we've made tremendous progress. And I often see, you know, migrant workers in a lot of places, they have access to Wi-Fi, or they can go in some public space, or they can use WhatsApp or Viber or any type of app. So we've made considerable progress with regards to making sure that people can communicate with their relatives and things like this, which is very important. Remember in Anna's reporting, this little boy looking at the computer to say hi to his mom before going to school. It's probable today that in the same context, that would be done with a smartphone or, you know, differently. However, international banking system, which is based on communication, so it's not necessarily a very sophisticated type of industry. I mean, it's for many of us, you know, wiring money to someone else within the country or within Europe is something we can do very easily. For a lot of migrant workers, it's still kind of a headache, and it's still the source of a lot of abuses. And that is something that is very frustrating because, yeah, it's hindering a lot of opportunities, a lot of development. And so that's something that would be really interesting to focus on also from a communication perspective. Also, when you add on top of that the vulnerabilities of migrants, while a lot of employers basically just take advantage of that situation to abuse and cheat workers. It can be wage theft, you know, basically promising something and doing deductions for housing or food or any other type of service that is given to the individual, and that you know, technically somewhat justifies the fact that you're withholding wages. And a lot of the experiences of migrants are actually those of, you know, deception between what has been offered on paper and the reality. Seto, I saw you raise your hand. Did you want to say something as well?
Yes, hi. I did want to contribute. I know that I haven't been contributing a lot. From a South African point of view, it actually gave me the past lessons catching up have given me a good idea on actually looking at a story of how migrants are contributing to the South African entrepreneurial landscape, because many of them come in and they are irregular, and they're unable to get jobs. And now the only thing that they can do to survive is to start small informal businesses on the side, and how those actually impact and contribute to municipalities or the local economy. And in some cases also jobs, particularly in a country where there's so much xenophobic talk about irregular migrants taking South Africans' jobs, but no one really talks about how astute migrants are when they come to South Africa, the skills that they bring, the businesses that they start, the jobs that they start as well. So all this talk also got me thinking about, going beyond just the surface and really looking at the contribution on a much more granular, but on a much more entrepreneurial level. Maybe there are also innovations that they come through. So it takes me back, I think, to the lesson of week 1, where you talk about skills that migrants bring into the country, and for migration and development of an economy. Looking at the entrepreneurship landscape and how they contribute to it in an informal basis.
Yeah, and then you can look at policy and see often how difficult it is for migrants to have their technical skills or diploma being recognized by the countries of destination. In framing that, after, I think it's important to be careful of not going towards too much generalization. We have a lot of experiences of migrant workers who come out to be successful entrepreneurs, or success not necessarily being economic success, but just, as you say, providing jobs or providing services. I think it's also interesting to look at experiences where that is being done in collaboration or in partnership with people from the country of destination. So that's kind of important in this kind of framing of migrants as a separated group. It's not always so much migrants' entrepreneurial skills, but it's like a combination of people from within the country and outside the country, and how that combines to create something that is interesting. But thanks a lot for your insights.
Thank you.
We've heard a lot of very different things this morning, so it's really interesting to see that. Some of you are, let's say, more interested or have taken home kind of the approach or the content. So all of that is very very interesting. Today I want to use a main resource. I've talked to you about it. I want to refer back to it because it's really valuable, and a little bit like last week when I told you that my effort was really to show you the type of resources that exist, not necessarily to take a full tour of all the resources. I want to focus here on this tool, the Reporting Forced Labor and Fair Recruitment Toolkit, because in terms of fundamentals, this is where we can find quite a lot of information. I've started off with this page because just for you to know that we have a standard tool that's available in different languages, so in Arabic, English, French, and Spanish. And we also have contextualized versions for a number of countries. And we are producing more and more adaptations. I think Chief K and Seto are from Southern Africa and Zimbabwe and that region. And so we're currently working on adapting this tool to the context of Southern Africa and SADC and COMESA and the Indian Ocean Commission to make it contextualized to the needs. What I'm going to be showing you right now is like kind of the standard English version, which is not specifically looking at any context in particular, but which provides some relevant guidance. And I want to give you a couple of key messages, fundamental messages that can be useful. First of all, well, this toolkit is structured in a way that is very kind of didactic and pedagogic. It takes you kind of by the hand from a position where you do not know much about the topic, all the way to what happens after you communicate or produce something. And it does that by following several steps. So the first important block is about understanding the story. Our approach to this is to say that if you want to be able to communicate effectively, you need to be able to fully grasp the story that is at hand. Some of you might have discovered that migrant workers from the Philippines are victim of abusive recruitment practices last week. But that's something that you can also get familiar with just by doing a little bit of research or by connecting you with the topic and kind of the general patterns and issues that we see. So this first module is about this. It's obviously about terminology, making sure that the words we use are accurate and, you know, we're not making confusion between concepts. And sorry, it's also about making sure that we understand the concept of forced labor and fair recruitment. And we also have some tools related to the legal framework. Once we have that, once we have a common understanding of the topic, the second big block of this tool is about how to find a story. And I'd like to spend some time around this today. I want to show you how, when we communicate, we can choose a frame from the very onset. And that choosing of the frame is very important. It's the angle, it's the story, it's the frame. All of that is kind of the same thing, is basically looking at labor migration in general and saying, I am going to isolate some aspect of it. And by isolating this, I'm going to be able to make a clear message, communicate something clearly, because I'm not trying to do a 52-minute film documentary on labor migration over time. I am zooming in on something rather specific. And so we're going to look at different types of specifics. Hopefully we can look a little bit at these two additional modules, which are basically saying, you know, once you have a story idea could be what Homa said, you know, like, I want to look at financial exclusion or financial transfer from country of destination to country of origin, and see how in that mechanism there is some sort of abuse. Or it can be what Michael was saying, you know, like, how does the recruitment process work? Or it can be what Chief Kemisimba was saying, you know, what is the lived experience of someone that has left 20 years ago, et cetera, et cetera. Once you have your story idea, you're going to need to get that story, find the sources. Michael has referred to how sometimes it's difficult, it's challenging. A Nigerian journalist will focus on returnees because it's easier, you know, you just wait for them at the airport and you get their testimony. But how do you get the story? How do you find the source? How do you work with sources, etc.? And then how do you tell the story? So I'm going to try to be covering, you know, some of these different aspects and show you a little bit how this resource is structured. if some of you want to navigate on the resource, either while I'm talking or later, you can just open this link and you'll see how it works. It works on the computer. It works on a smartphone as well. So the first step, so this tool is a website, and it's you just scroll down, and Chief is referring how to sustain the story, how to follow up, and that's very important. If you listen correctly to Anna, you will see that a lot of her stories actually have to do with the fact that she's coming back to the story regularly. If she's able to be in Paris when this Filipina domestic worker is reunited with her son 10 years after her leaving the country to work as a domestic worker, it's not because, she's a magician. It's because she has been following this story for 10 years. And maybe the moment when her story is going to get most traction or is going to best connect with the audience is not her first story talking to you about the life of this domestic worker in Paris, but it's going to be the story about when that lady is reunited with her son. So sustaining the storytelling, keeping the story for a long period of time, sticking with your sources, that's all very, very important. So all of these different chapters, understanding, finding, telling, getting the story, following up, are structured as websites that you can scroll through either with your cell phone or with your computer. You can just go down and it ends with the end of the module. At any given time, you can also go back to the main web page where you have the different modules. I see Aida saying that she still keeps up. I mean, I agree with that. Also, on a topic like migration, which is it can be quite personal. Some of the stories that you're going to do are really built on trust. Remember this very moving video, which we saw last Thursday, of this lady which spent several years behind bars and which shared her journal with Anna. Very, very personal story. I would imagine that Ana Santos is still in touch with her, because when someone has opened up about, a very difficult experience that he or she has lived, the trust that has been built, you would assume that, especially from the perspective of someone that is communicating this, you would want to keep the relationship over time. So that's really something that's important. So you scroll. We've put limited content in the text, but you have a lot of videos that you can open that give you some additional guidance. So you just click on the link and you will see this open. And these are testimonies. This is Viranjana, a journalist from Sri Lanka that I interviewed. And you basically have different testimonies. This is Reem, a journalist from Bahrain, or Regimon, a journalist from India. And so they talk to you about their experiences and how they are dealing with some specific issues related to reporting this topic. In this case, the focus is on terminology. We've already discussed this quite a lot last time, the importance of terminology. But as you can see, the tool is quite rich in additional resources. So instead of going in depth with a lot of advice and a lot of text, we've put some links that you can open and choose to read. They're all very much related to our topic. This is a COVID-related article that was done in the context of the United States, but I think that will resonate a lot with a lot of what you have been talking about already today. So like, for example, when Seto is saying that, you know, in South Africa, there is the idea that there's this xenophobic discourse, this scapegoating of migrants as being a problem or as people that are coming to take away jobs. Well, this is exactly what Annie Laurie is discussing in this article in the context of the United States. And especially framing it as the question of low-skilled workers, which would be some sort of a problem that needs to be fixed. If we have problems in our society, it's because of migrants, it's because of low-skilled migrants who, on one hand, are accused of taking away jobs, and on the other hand, are also accused of not contributing to society, because obviously they are doing low-skilled jobs. And I think this, you know, I've been trying to understand this, this question for some time and giving it some thought myself. And I think this has to do with a lot of the perception of, if you have low-skilled as an individual, as a grown-up man or woman, it's because you didn't succeed somewhere. And it has a lot to do with how we perceive our school system. You know, basically, in a lot of the countries where we are, education is accessible to a number of people. And basically, if at 20 or 25 years old, you have low skills, it's because you didn't perform well in school. And there is some idea that, you know, you can blame yourself for that. And there is, yeah, low-skilled jobs are often low-paid jobs, and they are of low social status. And so there's a lot of stigma associated to that. And this connects very much with the skills conversation we were having just before with Seto. So you come in a new society. Maybe you don't speak the language. Maybe your diploma is not recognized. Maybe the skills that you have are not recognized because you come from a sea-based community and you have fishing skills, and you end up in Geneva, in Switzerland, in a landlocked country where fishing skills are not worth much. And so you are a low-skilled worker and you're a problem for society. And so this article is very profound. It's about terminology. It's about, the idea of low-skilled workers, skill gaps, skill mismatch, and all of that perceived as a problem. And everyone needs upskilling. And the COVID conversation showed us that actually it's quite different, because when your country is completely blocked, it's in lockdown, while the people that are making the economy turn tend to be migrants, and those precisely doing the low-skilled jobs. Seto, you wanted to say something about this?
Yes, definitely. So I think I find it interesting that you talk about that, because the situation also tends to be slightly different this side, because of most of the migrants would be coming from neighboring Zimbabwe, for instance, and they are way highly more educated than an average South African. So in this context, you would find that someone that has a master's degree finds themselves doing gardening work or even washing dishes, all in the name of escaping poverty back where they come from. But they have to start from the very, very beginning. So you'd find that they're actually, in some cases, there are those that are very lowly skilled, like you say, and those that are extremely highly skilled, but cannot, get into the system. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Seto, I really invite you to read that article, because you're going to see that actually what the journalist is referring to is quite similar to what you are saying. So what she's criticizing is this obsession of, let's say, the political class, or this conversation around low-skilled workers that are a problem. But what she's saying also is that often behind this label of low-skilled worker, what we find is people that have a lot of skills and that are unable to use their skills in the labor market, mainly because of skill recognition issues. So, because when these people arrive, for example, well, it's very difficult for them to come, so they cannot come on the right visa. Sometimes they will come with no visa, so they will be in an irregular situation. The jobs that they would be eligible for with their education are not available for them because they do not have a visa, and they cannot enter the labor market in an orderly way. And so it's the whole system that is a little bit of a vicious circle that is, pushing people in informal work or in low paid work, etc. And the analysis that the journalist is making is that it's a lot of it's a very big missed opportunity in a lot of cases. After, there's a second thing that's within that conversation that's equally important. It's how a lot of people who consider themselves to be skilled, to some extent that could be my case. I have a college degree. I am with regards to diploma in the percentile in society which is highest. And I can very easily see a carpenter or a plumber or someone that is doing gardening, as you are saying, or that is a truck driver, to be someone that is low skilled. Now, what is ironic in this is that if you take me from my service or high-skilled job into their position, what you will realize is that even though I constantly say that this is low-skilled, I am completely unable to do the type of work that these people are doing. Even what sometimes we consider to be unskilled work, many of us would not be able to do it just from the physical exhaustion or the difficulty of the job. And so that's something that we need to constantly revisit. How can we have a conversation around skills, around integration in the labor market that is more effective of workers and that is less judgmental as well? Nasikiwa, I see you've shared also an article by Jonas Berane. Why do you think this article is relevant to the conversation we're having? If you can take the floor.
Thank you, Charles. Good morning from Tanzania. So, actually, when I woke up, I went through LinkedIn and then I saw that he's posted the article. So I was like, oh, okay, this is actually what we've been learning in class. Let me just take a look and read through it. So when I read through it, I was like, oh my God. So he's actually gave us a depth analysis of what is actually happening in Ethiopia, the do's and don'ts on labor migrants, how unfairly some of them are treated, especially from government perspective, the amount of fees that are incurred by migrant workers, some of them illegally, some of them legally, but also we also note the challenges that Ethiopian as a government has really recognized and are working on it together with some of the institutes and organizations like the ILO, the National Employment Association. So it's actually an interesting article for me. And I was like, oh, so this it's just, I think it's chewed it all for some of us to understand what we've been discussing for the past 2 weeks, which I think you've also touched on it today again. So I've learned, like, I'm actually picking the pieces, especially this is the first time I'm like learning more about migrant workers in the country. It's also giving me a push up to write an article about the migrants in Tanzania. You know, we haven't done much, like, as compared to other countries like Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia. But I do know that there are some challenges, and maybe the Ministry of Labor is also working towards improving how we can make this a success into the country. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot. And I mean, it brings me to the idea, maybe something I want to share with you quickly, or try to do with you very quickly, is, you know, for me, one of the main problems is the paradox between, so I will put a line here. This is a whiteboard. We can all collaborate on it together if we want. Issues related to perception and issues related to reality or understanding. So if I put some words that we've been talking about today, so for example, a lot of migrant workers, you know, perception of society is that they would be unskilled or low skilled or lacking skills. And then when you read and you document yourself, what you realize is that, sorry, let me take an arrow, is that the reality can be very different from that. And in my opinion, so when you actually ask people, you might find that they have skills, they have diploma, they have experience. But the problem is that maybe the migration governance is making it difficult to have those skills be recognized, etc. It might be also that they are working in low-paid jobs, which are considered as low-skill jobs. But maybe that's because they don't have, because of migration governance, again, other opportunities available for them. And so for me, I mean, in my opinion, this is where communication and journalism plays a big role. Because it's how we can kind of reconcile perception and reality. This is mainly what we are talking about here. We can have communication and journalism that is only located here, and that is fueling only the perception, and that maybe will be fueling stereotypes and prejudice and misrepresentation. Or we can have journalism and communication that is here, that is documenting reality, that is documenting the situation. And we can have, I think, something that's very interesting that is a bit at the intersection here, which is communication and journalism that is cognizant of the perception that people have and cognizant of the reality, and that will try to bring people closer to reality. I hope this makes sense. But you can really try to when you think about migration, try to ask yourself, is this perception, is this reality? So I don't know if some of you remember when we started off last time, we started off with numbers. So the number of international migrants as a share of world population. So the reality is 3%. When you ask people about their perception or what they think, they will tell you 20%. Or they will tell you 10%. Or they will tell you even more. And so the challenge of good communication and good journalism is to bring people to try to understand why is everyone in our society thinking that it's this high. It's that there must be some sort of a communication problem, or there must be some sort of a perception problem. And you can apply this to a lot of different contexts. I think your responsibility lays in bridging the gap between perception and reality. That's what is important. Okay. I'll take a small picture of this before I close it, because once I close it, it's not something that we can use again. Okay. Does this make sense to all of you? This kind of framework between perception and reality? Anyone want to comment this? Okay, I'll close it, but please keep this in mind. I think it's an important framework to keep in mind. Let me go back to our presentation, and thanks to our colleague for sharing this idea of an article. I won't go too much in detail about the understanding the story section, but basically just bear in mind that if you're uncomfortable with some concepts, go back to this resource. You'll have a lot of pedagogy, explanation around what is forced labor, what is labor exploitation in the context of migration, why is migration like poverty, like illiteracy, like discrimination, a factor of heightened vulnerability to abuse, etc., etc. And the same thing with unfair recruitment. So you see there's a little bit of background here, and you can look at it and try to understand it better. Decent work, fair recruitment, how do these two kind of combine? Another thing that is interesting in this section of the tool is the part on legal frameworks. So as you know, we have a comprehensive set of tools that were designed over time. So this is a historical timeline of the different instruments, so you can put them back in time. What is very interesting to note, if you look at it through this kind of historical timeline, is how there has been, over time, an acceleration of instruments on the topic, basically since the end of the 1990s. We've been regulating private employment agencies, recruitment agencies, as some of you have referred to. We've been elevating principles and rights at work as fundamental principles and rights at work, recognizing that some labor rights are actually human rights. We've been focusing on specific categories of worker, like domestic workers, and developing standards specifically targeting them. And we've been revisiting some of the old labor standards, like the Forced Labor Convention of 1930, to basically update them to the current situation. So a lot has been happening in terms of changing the international framework on labor standards. And I've not even started talking about more regional or national pieces of legislation. So for sure, if you want to be a good communicator, a good journalist on this, you need to be full of understanding. And to be full of understanding, you need to connect yourself with the evolving legal frameworks. That's very important. So here you can, have some short documents, understand what is at stake, always kind of check, like domestic workers. I don't know. What does this convention, what's it about? So here's a short document in a couple of pages that gives you the Domestic Workers Convention at a glance. So it's not too long. It's about 15, 20 pages long, and you can really get a good understanding. Some of you might be saying, you know, like, has my country or has the country where I'm working in ratified? So you can very quickly see here, directly access a list of countries that have ratified. We talked about Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe doesn't appear here. Zimbabwe has not ratified. What about Tanzania? Tanzania has not ratified. And if you want, you can directly look at the list of countries that have not ratified this instrument, and you will find that Zimbabwe is here, and so you will directly access the information. Okay. We've also put here on this map, this is Nigeria here. We've put a list of interesting innovations at the national level. So you can click on the map and get familiar with some of these examples of what is being done in Brazil, what is being done in the US, what is being done in the UK, etc., etc. What I want to move to is this second chapter that I'd like to talk to you a little bit about. First, so as you can see in this tool, there's a lot of quotes. Quotes from journalists, from senior officials, a lot of different quotes. This quote here is one I like very much. It was written in the context of a war, actually, of the Gulf War, and it's an editor from the BBC, John Simpson, who looked back at his work several years after his reporting, and he was quite critical of his own body of work. Looking back, he said, you know, I used to think the essence of good reporting, and we could extend that to good communication, lay in showing people that subjects they had always thought were too complicated to understand could in fact be explained simply and easily. Now, looking back at my own work, I have changed my mind. Everyone, from the man beside you at the bar to the writer of newspaper editorial, seems to think there is an easy answer to everything. I have come to realize that good reporting, and I would say good communication, should show people that the big issues of the day are usually complicated and require real thought. The simple, off-the-cuff answers are often just the result of impatience and ignorance, not of understanding. Now here I want to pause a second, and I want to bring a second whiteboard to this, because this is another fundamental question in the field of communication and journalism. Another, I would say, tension, which is the tension between, let's put it here, simple, and let's put here complex. Journalism is about bridging this gap between these two worlds. So in simple here, I would put all migrants are criminals. This is a simplification of the reality. But an equally simplified version would be to say that no migrants are criminals. And then the complex would be to say that maybe X percentage of people who commit crime have a migration related background, etc., etc., etc. And I can go towards the more and more complex. And the challenge of communication is to finding a way to make the complex accessible. This is how I frame it. Making the complex accessible is giving tools to the audience to understand a complex situation and be able to process it in a way that is not too complex. And in doing that, you need to move away from two trends. One, which is pushing you towards simplification, simplifying the issues. And that is a very dangerous trend. And another trend, which is the trend that is pushing you towards complexifying the issue, which is equally problematic. Because if you make it too complex, people do not resonate with your story. Chief, I see you commenting saying that migration is not ahistorical. What do you mean?
So Charles, so I'm just adding another complexity to what you think there, you know, that we, like in the context of my region, migration has been happening since forever. You know, it's not something that started yesterday or last year or 10 years ago. If you go back as far as, I'm actually, like as a result of this course, reading a book from 1900, and there was migration happening in 1900. And you know, some of it was deliberate. You know, like if you look at the migration patterns between South Africa and Zimbabwe, there's actually like structures in South Africa that was promoting migration. And prior to that, migration has been always happening in our region, you know, historically, you know, prior to these national boundaries that came as a result of colonialism. So this is an area that I'm like really sort of interested in, and it's been something that I've been thinking about a lot, particularly as a result of this course, and whatever work that I'm going to do, I'm actually will be looking at this part of history that I think partly explains the migration patterns that are happening now. You know, so when we look at migration, I think we also need to look at history, and I see this pattern elsewhere. You know, like I know, because I've been to Germany, where I know the Germany government used to actually promote like workers from Turkey to come into Germany to do construction work. Yet when the subject of migration is talked about today, it's only couched in this, you know, it's criminalized, it's looked at from one perspective. So I think this idea of migration being ahistorical needs to be questioned, and I think it just adds a layer of complexity to the whole subject matter.
It does. It's really one of the critical aspects. And so the risk, because you always have to think about risk and kind of reward. The risk is to get lost because history is huge. And so, you know, you can make it very difficult to understand if you're tapping too much into history, or if you're tapping into historical events that don't have so much relevance today. But definitely, you know, if I take my country, France, which has had a colonial experience, we cannot understand labor migration from former French colonies, from Mali, from Senegal, from Guinea-Conakry to France, if we don't factor in the historical dimension. If we refuse to factor in the historical dimension, then we are simplifying the story, because we are removing all of the, I would say, layers of interactions that define the relationship. And so this, for me, is one of the fundamental challenges that you have as a communicator. It's, I want to reach the I want to reach the widest crowd possible. And in order to do so, I want my storytelling, I want my story to be simple and accessible. I want my language to be simple. I want the images to be accessible, etc., etc. So I have a very strong, I see this as two magnets that are attracting you with different type of discourse. The simple magnet is attracting you by saying, if you want to be heard, if you want to be understood, you need to be simple in some way, not too technical. And therefore, terminology, should you be speaking of victim of human trafficking? Should you be speaking of migrant in an irregular administrative situation? Or should you be speaking of undocumented migrant? Well, undocumented is a simplification. It's inaccurate because migrants from Southern Africa going to South Africa, or from Central America going to the US, or from any region moving to another region, have documents. So they're not undocumented. They lack proper administrative regularity. But if I want to use the most appropriate term, I'm being pulled by the magnet that is complexifying what I'm saying. It's making it longer. It's maybe I'm losing the connection with the audience. And so when you are communicating, you are going to be constantly wrestling with those two magnetic forces. The one that is pushing you towards simplification and the one that is pushing you towards complexification. And in my opinion, the good communicator is the one that is capable of reconciling both. That is capable of using simple language, simple images, simple metaphors that a lot of people relate to and that resonates with a lot of people. And at the same time, that is capable of integrating the historical dimension. And this at times works through shared knowledge or shared experiences. Some of you from Southern Africa might know Stimela, the coal train, the train that used to be taking workers to go and work in gold mines in Southern Africa. Now that is an image that might resonate with a lot of people because it's come into popular culture, because it's been used by artists as a metaphor, etc., etc. And so sometimes when you use references to popular culture or to things like this, you will be understood more easily than not. But it's one of the main challenges that we have, juggling with complex and simplification. Okay. I'll take this image away and share it with you on the platform as well. I want to go back to the presentation and show you a little bit what you can take away from this tool. Another very interesting reflection. So as you can see, this tool has been done with contributions by journalists and by communicators. And one of them is Mimi Shakarova. She's a very experienced American and Belarusian journalist. And she's made a simple list of do's and don'ts that I want to run you through, give you some thought about it. The first thing that she recommends is, she says, to be able to produce something effective, you need to know what is currently being currently being communicated by the media, etc. And then ideally what you need to do is to look for cracks in the surface. You know, what are the stories? What are the topics that are being poorly covered? Omar, you talked about financial transfers? Is this something that is sufficiently being talked about? If yes, maybe it's not necessarily to invest time and energy in providing additional communication. But you can look at what is poorly being covered. Maybe Nasikiwa, what you liked in the story that you read on LinkedIn, what resonated with the story is that in a comprehensive way, it put together different things that you are used to seeing in a way that is disconnected. So sometimes it's not just focusing on stories that are poorly covered, but it's helping people make sense of different elements. The second advice that she gives is to tell stories from an unusual perspective. Look at the experience of survivors. Look at the work of an ethical recruiter. So challenge and not take the typical angle. Take a different angle. Go back to Anna's reporting. She's interested in looking at the fisherman that comes back and following him when he goes back to his village. She's interested not at documenting the experience of the domestic worker in terms of the work that she's doing, but how is she coping with parenting long distance? She's interested in looking at the experience of truck drivers. So that's a lot of curiosity as well. Obviously, one advice from Mimi is to reach out to relevant expertise. It can be international organizations, it can be employers and workers organizations, civil society, academia, etc., etc. And then the last advice is to assess the feasibility. One way not to get lost in complexity, there was a couple of years ago, a movie that was called Lost in Translation, if some of you remember. Well, we could say the same thing about being lost in complexity. One way to not get lost in complexity is to assess the feasibility of what you're doing with regards to time, with regards to legal risks, with regards to financial resources that might be needed. So those are some simple advice that can guide you in terms of the right direction. Equally, there are some don'ts. One thing is to avoid looking for stories that are sensational. I talked earlier about this kind of tension between perception and reality. Sometimes we look for stories. We're not trying to document reality. We are trying to find a story that feeds the narrative that we have in mind. So if I go back to a simple vision, all migrants are criminals, then I'm just going to talk to you about migration when I see a crime being committed. And we have media outlets where I live that do exactly that. They will talk to you about migration only if there is a crime involved. They do not talk to you about crime, or they do not give you the nationality when it's committed by a non-migrant, but they give you the nationality when it's committed by a migrant. There was a very, very interesting experience that was done a couple of years ago in the region of Saxe with migration and criminality and the press. And what they did is that they looked at a rule in the German press. You are not allowed to give the nationality of someone that has committed a crime to avoid scapegoating migrants. But there is a region that decided to do the opposite. And they said, no, we will give the nationality of criminals. And in doing so, maybe they thought that, it would lead to anti-migrant sentiment? Well, exactly the opposite arrived, because since they were reporting crime, they were reporting the nationality every time that there was a crime being committed. And what was happening is that there were much more crimes being committed by German people. And so what happens is that when they were surveyed, the inhabitants of that region said, they were asked two questions. Do you think that migrants commit more crimes than non-migrants? And they said no, because they were exposed to reports where they would see that the majority of the crimes were being committed by German. But the second thing that they said was that they were more afraid to go outside because they had understood that criminality was much more present around them than they thought. So they moved from a mindset where they were associating crime to migration to a mindset where they were understanding that crime was happening irrespective of the status of the people. And so they started becoming more fearful of their neighbors as well. So this is something that is very, very interesting in terms of, you know, our perception and reality. So don't look for stories that feed an existing narrative by distorting reality. The second advice is, in terms of don'ts, is don't overlook that you are dealing with vulnerable persons. Migrants often tend to be in a situation of vulnerability, and so your communication, your reporting might have consequences. And the last advice is to avoid confusion between information and advocacy. This is particularly relevant for journalists. Your job as a journalist is not to advocate. It's not to tell people what they should think. It's to give them information that will help them think with all the necessary tools and come to their own decision. Their own decision might not be the one that you agree with, but what we want through the press and television and radio and professional media is to produce content that helps people be informed and make informed decisions. But our role is not to tell them what they have to think. There's a nuance between these two. The rest of this chapter here on finding a story is a list of story ideas. And I'm sure that, you know, Seto and Chief Masimba and Oma and all the rest here, if you go through this, you will have, if not a dozen, at least several stories that will come to your mind. They are framed by big families. We can look at this topic through the lens of people, through the lens of money, through the lens of work, through the lens of migration, through the lens of justice, through the lens of awareness, through the lens of discrimination. All of those different lenses will be just exactly lenses that we put on our glasses to look at reality through a specific kind of angle. And so in those different families, we offer you ideas of question. In Zimbabwe, how are people being recruited? In Tanzania, in Ethiopia, in Malaysia, what work do they do? What journey do they do? If they are unfree, how do they access freedom again? What is the reaction of their community, etc., etc.? And for each type of story, we give you examples that might inspire you of journalists that have produced this type of story or communicators that have communicated this way. As I've said, stories about work, stories about money, stories about migration and mobility, stories about discrimination and differences, stories about justice, crime, law enforcement, and stories about awareness, education, information. So I'd like to pause here. I've already given you a lot of information. I don't want to be too heavy. I want to give you the time to go through this resource, look at it. I see that you've been sharing a lot of additional ideas. I hope that either Mickey or Marion can take a copy of the chart so that we can put some of these links on the forum so that we can go back to them afterwards. I see a thumb up, so that's great. And I just want in a couple of minutes to know if some of you have any questions, any final remarks on today's session, so that we end on time and you can go back to your other activities as well. Any final comments, questions? If you want to react, yeah, go ahead.
I like the last part that you just pointed out, because for me, I think it also points to sustaining the story, you know, not just one story, but like you can sustain the migration story by focusing on different aspects of migration. So that you can literally like have a breaking news story every day, you know, if you just map it right. So you can focus on recruitment agencies, you can focus on discrimination. Like in my country here, we've got a lot of young Mozambican, you call them like low-skilled laborers, because they're often like on the streets selling cigarettes. I mean, I think they're fulfilling something, but the way that they're discriminated against is something else. So, you know, I'll give you an example. So the police will go to them and give them like difficult local language terminologies, and they'll ask them, like, can you pronounce that? You know, and once that person can't pronounce it, then they immediately get arrested and they're put in prison and then immediately deported without any access to due, you know, there's no access to justice, you know, and besides, this young man, I think they barely have any knowledge about the legal system. So immediately they're put on trucks and they're sent back to Mozambique. So that's one story that I could pursue, for example, about labor migration, in addition to other stories. So I like that last part of the module.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at, I mean, just go back, for example, to Anna's story on the domestic worker parenting from Paris. That's not one story. There's actually 100 stories, and you can apply all of the different lens to her. You can say there's a human story, and I'm going to do a report or communicate about her experience. But I can look at her work. What is she working? What are her working conditions? How was she recruited? Is she treated fairly? Does she have her wages on time? Is she victim of wage theft? You can look at it through money. How much does she earn? Is it a living wage? Is it enough to take care of herself and her children? How does she send money back to the Philippines? Is she being cheated in the process? Is she losing money? Does that mean that she's exposing her child to maybe hunger or some other type of issues, or lack of access to education because she's being cheated in the process? How about discrimination? Is she victim of discrimination, xenophobia, abuse, harassment? How about access to justice? If she is victim of such wage theft, is there any access to justice, remedy? How does it work? Does she have support? Can she be given any legal guidance? Things like this. So there's not one story. There is, each time you meet a character or you meet a situation, there's 100 stories. After, you choose depending on your analysis on the feasibility, like Mimi says, on what already exists and what are the cracks in the surface, what is missing in your opinion, and what people should know. And then you try to do that story as best as you can, dealing with the simple and the complex, etc. I'm going to leave it here and just let you give it some thought. We already have an appointment in just 2 days' time. So we're going to see each other very, very soon. I thank you for the active participation, especially all of those who shared articles, ideas in the chat. That's really great. I know some of you are a little bit more discreet. Maybe, you know, you have some other things to do as well. That's not a problem at all. I look forward to seeing all of you on Thursday. And in the meantime, if there's anything, you don't hesitate to use the platform for that. Okay? That's it for today. And thanks a lot.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you to all the participants also, as usual, sharing their story. And I see hands being clapped and thumbs being raised. So that's a very good reaction. Thank you all. And as Charles said, we will see you on Thursday. Have a lovely rest of the week.
Take care.
See you
Thank
then.
you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
See you on Thursday.
Bye-bye.